quarterback sleepers, potential breakouts, late round gems, all that, and so much more on today's Fantasy Life show. Truly is a great day to be great. And accordingly, I'm joined by the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwayne "The Rock" McFarland, to again break down some of the biggest questions and, the kind of tier 2, tier 3 QB range. You guys can, check out all of our rankings over at fantasylife.com. And we invite you to check out yesterday's episode if you want to see, again, more of an in-depth look at the top 12 quarterbacks. But Dwayne, we're going to start digging in the rough here. And I want to start things off with the guy that we have on the QB1 borderline, aka Lions QB Jared Goff. And I'm just asking the question, does Goff really deserve that much of a benefit of the doubt over fellow pocket passers like Tua Tagovailoa and Matthew Stafford?
I don't think he does. Look, we love the Lions. We love the Lions offense. There are a lot of positives. I think the issue is overall, you just generally shouldn't be drafting an archetype like Jared Goff inside the top 12, which is why I've got him as QB 16. I'm definitely the lowest of the Fantasy Life rankers. I'm not saying I hate Jared Goff. I'm not saying I would never draft Jared Goff, in a fantasy draft. But as far as the type of archetype that's truly going to unlock a big ceiling, he doesn't have it. It's such a narrow needle to thread. And we've talked about it many times in the past, Ian. These guys that just 100%. Okay. We have guys that are 90% dependent on their passing. CJ Stroud at least will run around for 10 or 11 yards a game. Dak will run around for 10 or 11 yards a game. We're talking about the guys that run around for 2 or 3 yards per game, right? If we average it out, and Jared Goff is one of those. And if you look at the variance logic that we built out this offseason to really look at the range of outcomes on the way that these different statistics stack up to give us fantasy points, it's just a really narrow needle to thread, like I was talking about earlier. So while the median projection for Jared Goff comes in really strong at 17.5, and that's fine, his ceiling is only 20.5, right? So right now I'm sitting here looking at the variance logic tool. I don't have every quarterback in there, but I've got 26 of them in there. He ranks 24th in ceiling, right? And look, and he's been hitting his ceiling of getting close to 20 fantasy points per game. But you got to throw for 290 yards per game. You got to throw over 2 touchdowns per game. So, I've got Goff projected for 263 passing yards per game, one of the highest on the site. That gives him a ceiling of 289 per game. So really his run out is he's got to get lucky in this touchdown, department. Kind of like what Baker Mayfield did last year. But again, at least Baker, he was running around for 15, 20 yards per game, and we don't get that from Goff. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're still going to lean to the Lions over the Dolphins. We slightly trust them more. They're going to play in a dome. You're going to lean to those two over Stafford because they have done well. I think Stafford and Tua are pretty close, but they're all very similar archetypes, and they really do come out in the same range when you start thinking about ceiling outcomes.
Last year, just 4 of the top 28 quarterbacks actually had fewer than 5% of their fantasy production come on the ground. It was Goff, Tua, Aaron Rodgers, and Matthew Stafford. So Dwayne is not kidding. We're getting a legit 0 more weeks than not on the ground from Goff, which, again, hasn't killed him. These last 3 years, he's helped lead top 5, real-life scoring offenses. He's finished as a QB 13, QB 14, most recently QB 7 in fantasy points per game. But I think the crux of the argument, Dwayne, by the way, wild, 24th out of 26 best ceiling. That's not great. I don't want to be, trying to go for that first or last mindset. That's our, upside scenario. Last year, things went great. Goff was great. And he scored 19 fantasy points per game. So again, it's not a matter of Goff, being someone we shouldn't be ranking inside the top 15 or top 16. I'm fine having him ahead of Tua and Stafford. But when you add, again, that opportunity cost, how much it actually is going to take to buy the guy, I do think Tua and Stafford are a bit more deserving. And moving on now to Tua, just a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, he had the spike touchdown season last year. 6.9% of his passes went for a touchdown. Remember, the league average for an NFL starter is 4.6%. If you look at Jared Goff, over his career, including that 6.9, which would be a career high, his average is 4.6%. Now, if we look at it just in context of the Lions over these last few years, he's sitting at 5.6%. So I gave him a healthy, range as far as his starting point, as far as his median goes for passing touchdowns. But folks have got to remember, he probably already banked his touchdowns per attempt, maybe career high last season. So it's probably coming down already this year. So sorry to interrupt. It's just when I heard what you were saying, I was like, man, I had to call this out.
No, you're good. And also probably shouldn't expect things to get that much better without wonderkind Ben Johnson. All right. I mean, John Morton did spend time with the Lions before. He was the, pass game coordinator with the Broncos over these past 2 years. His quote on record is, "I'm not changing much. I mean, why?" Which is pretty hilarious and also true. So again, not expecting the Lions offense to fall off the map, but Goff really just, again, that pocket passer archetype, not something we want to get too worked up about. Similar sentiment is true for Tua and Stafford, but again, they're going so much later in drafts that it's not as big of an issue. And Tua in particular, Dwayne, I do feel like could be due for a bounce back season. We were just 1 year removed from the Dolphins finishing as a second ranked scoring offense. And as I was writing my Miami Dolphins team preview, which you can find over at fantasylife.com, I was surprised at actually how good Tua still was last season when he was healthy enough to suit up. I mean, we're still talking about a guy who was 7th in EPA per dropback, actually a little bit better in terms of that number compared to 2023, and still managed to finish, as a QB 14 in fantasy points per game. So again, Dwayne, if you have the opportunity to draft Goff at that QB1 borderline or Tua as QB20, QB21, I think I'm taking Tua, man.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a reason. I get it. People are worried about the concussions with Tua, so you could be without the quarterback. And also, we're still dealing with a profile, an archetype that doesn't have a super high ceiling. They only have that one path, and that is to have this absolutely astronomical passing season. Now, he fits in the same tier as Goff because he's got the weapons around him, right? Doesn't get to play in the dome. Obviously, the injury is the one thing pushing him down lower. But yes, once you account for the fact that Jared Goff is sometimes going inside the top 12 picks in fantasy leagues, sometimes as high as pick 10, yeah, I'm out on that. I just don't really want to spend that pick. I'd much rather spend it on Tua. There's going to be some other guys we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. The challenge with Tua, though, is very similar to Goff. And you mentioned it, only 5%, right, of his fantasy points, or 5% or less, coming from that rushing department. So it's just really tough to find a ceiling case for these guys.
And then with Stafford, similar sentiment. I mean, he hasn't finished better than QB 16 since his first year with the Rams. That said, when you look at the potential for him to have a healthy Puka and a healthy Devontae Adams, I mean, that should be the best wide receiver core he's had during his time with the Rams. Again, as long as everyone can stay healthy. So if you do find yourself getting to those deep stages of the draft, oh my God, I missed out on a quarterback. What am I going to do? I do think Stafford is an underrated option to help get you through some weeks. And then maybe you can, buy a lottery ticket in the form of Anthony Richardson, maybe Jaxson Dart, more rush-heavy QB, more on those sort of guys here in just a little bit. But Dwayne, let's stick again more so around that QB1 borderline, because don't look now, you happen to be the highest fantasy life ranker on Cowboys QB1 Dak Prescott. So who is your favorite sleeper quarterback going round 10 or later, Dwayne, and why is it Dak Prescott?
I don't feel like getting to call it Dak Prescott. I don't feel like we should be allowed to call him a sleeper. Because he's been around so long. But technically, I guess he fits the criteria. He's not going inside the top 12 quarterbacks, which means most people don't consider him to be a starting quarterback this year in fantasy football. And Ian, for me, it's really simple. Dak does just enough on the ground. Now, that did come down last year. He's obviously he's not the guy that's going to give you 19 to 20 rushing yards per game like he did early in his career. Not going to score as many rushing touchdowns. He has dealt with some injuries over the last few years that have slowed him down, but he can still be one of these guys who can give you 10 to 15 rushing yards per game, right? So kind of in the range of where we would project Baker after some regression from his 22 yards per game last year. Really a very similar range. And that's my thesis here around Dak Prescott. He is essentially Baker Mayfield, but you're not having to take him at pick 8. Yes, he's gotten older. He's going to be 32 years old. A lot of this does depend on health. But look, football's a violent game. I'm not going to worry too much about the injuries, Ian. Whenever you look at it, the last 2 times he has played a full season of games or played at least 16 games, we go back to 2023. He gave you 20.7 fantasy points per game. The difference between him and Goff, it doesn't feel like a lot, but that little bit that he can do on the ground is the difference from your ceiling being, a 19 to 20 to being more like a 22 to 23. Then if you look in 2021, when he played 16 games, he averaged 21 fantasy points per game. So I think when you look at him with CeeDee Lamb, plus now what we have with George Pickens, I think you could argue going back to that 2021 team, this is probably the best wide receiver duo he has, right? And we're saying Jake Ferguson, fine, whatever. At this point, we're just going to call him an average to above average tight end. We're not even counting him as being this big potential piece of the offense, but he's still a young
dog
player.
In him, though. Got that dog in him.
He does. He is. And he will run that seam route. And man, Dak will barely miss him 7 times, a season, where I'm like, oh, that was nearly a touchdown. So I just look at Dak and I'm like, okay, really the biggest factor is he was injured. People are going to say that he was bad last year. But if we look at the bigger body of work, and I think it comes down to he's going to be 32. Do we really think that Dak is old at 32? When you watch him actually throw the ball, it's not like the arm strength and those things are gone. I do believe his lower body does need to be healthy to be able to continue to do some of the things that he's done in the past. But I'm going to assume that he's going to be healthy. And at 32 years old, I'm looking at a quarterback that 2 out in his last 2 healthy seasons has been someone that's ranked as the QB7 and QB3 overall. I definitely want to be in on that, especially if I'm going to be able to get him at a discount after pick 12 in fantasy drafts.
Don't we have to give some explanation for him being bad last year? It's not people saying he was bad. I mean, he was worse in EPA per dropback than Kirk Cousins, than Russell Wilson, than Aaron Rodgers. QB 22 in fantasy points per game. We had an 8-game sample, Dwayne. It's not like he was entering some of those games and leaving after 20 snaps. I mean, we had half a season where he was really bad, and I just get worried when the personnel changes that we can hang our hat on as a first-round guard, replacing Hall of Famer Zach Martin, and George Pickens. I like George Pickens. I agree with your point that he is now helping make the best wide receiver core since 2021. But why did it go so bad for Dak last year when he was healthy, when Brian Schottenheimer was still leading the charge?
Well, here's my thought. Variance. Like, weird things happen. Like, what of these data points, which one is the one that stands out that's not like the rest? All right, here's Dak's fantasy dropback points or his fantasy points per dropback going back over the last several years. 0.49, 0.55, 0.56, 0.52, 0.50, 0.53, 0.40. Like, it's most likely just a variant. It's just a year that, look, we get ceilings and we also have floors in our logic, and it can happen to anyone. I'm chalking this up that this is probably just a bad year for Dak. Now, if Dak was 35, 36 years old and we were starting to get these sort of numbers, I do think we've got more data around quarterbacks really starting to decline at that age. I'm about to be writing up my quarterback tiers. If people want to check this out, you can actually go check out my quarterback tiers from last year. But at the very beginning, I talk about what does prime production look like for quarterbacks, and then when do you start to see the drop off, and then when do you really need to be concerned? And he's not in that range where I would say, okay, this is probably age setting in. Could I be wrong on that? Absolutely, because every player is a little bit different. So I'm not completely ruling it out. There could still be this floor case for Dak, but whenever I really look at this and then I take it down to fantasy points per dropback going back through his career, the one number that looks different is the 8-game sample from last year. So I'm really going to be betting on all the other data points.
I guess I'm a little more worried that these injuries maybe have caught up to him. I mean, you look at his rushing numbers before and after that horrific ankle break, it really was a steep drop off. Got up a little bit more after, I think it was 2022, but that wasn't good. The shoulder injury. I remember that week 1 game against the Buccaneers, and it looked like he was just throwing, every single pass had so much touch on it, kind of lost some of his zip, doesn't quite have the same arm strength. Then he just tore his hamstring off his bone. That's unfortunate, man. And again, it's one of these situations where he's so cerebral before the snap, And again, he did play at an MVP level in 2023. So I hear you. I don't want to be completely out, but when I'm just looking at this landscape, Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert or Jordan Love or Trevor Lawrence, Drake May.
Dak has a higher ceiling than those guys. Dak has a higher ceiling than those guys. He's already proven it. And I'm betting on the ceiling. And we're going to talk about the other. We'll talk about the other guys, but I think Dak has a higher ceiling than both of those guys. And if you're talking about rushing, they're all in the same department. Yeah. I mean, so you're talking about, yes, he was at 22, 19, 17, and 19 yards rushing per game. Then he had the bad ankle injury, and he came back and he was at 15 and 14. Yeah, he was down 3 or 4 yards, but it's not like he's not running at all. So I think that Dak is still good enough in the rushing department. Like, he's giving you a smidge. He's obviously not on that range with like a Kyler Murray or even like a Drake May, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, like a tier below that, but enough in the rushing department. And we have seen him time after time after time put up these massive seasons as far as what it looks like as a passer. Whereas a lot of these other guys, it's been much more inconsistent.
All right. I'm seeing 7 rushing yards per game last year. Just saying. It's not good.
In a year where he's hurt. Great. Again, we have an outlier year. I don't know why we want to hang our hat on the one number that looks different than the rest. It's just not a process I'm going to do.
It's the most recent one. And we're saying George Pickens is going to change this.
So we should use the most recent one with all these players. We should use the most recent data point, and that should be the thing we use. Because I completely disagree. I do believe that once a player gets to a certain age.
I never said only thing. I think it's a red flag, though.
We have red flags like that all over the place with all sorts of players. Yeah, so what do you think about a guy? Never mind. We'll get into Jalen Waddle and guys like that later. There's guys littered across the league that are like that last year that really, they're still technically in the prime of their career based on the positions they play. And they had a bad year. we have to remember, just like you can have a spike season, you can also have a floor ceiling, and there doesn't always have to be an explanation for it. And my bet is that's what's happening with Dak, not anything else.
Could be. Well, I'm in a little bit of disagreement. Dak is my QB 19 right now. Dwayne is leading the way with the fantasy rankers at QB 12. Hopefully our friendship can again maintain this, ranking discrepancy here in early May. But moving right along, I did want to talk about two guys who, again, I do have ranked ahead of Dak because I do believe at this point in time in the year 2025, they have a little bit more upside. And those guys are Justin Herbert and Jordan Love. Both have returned top 5 fantasy seasons during their short careers. Which one, though, Dwayne, do you think has a better chance of repeating that feat in 2025?
They're the same thing. They both have a ceiling of 21.4. They both have a median. They have a median of 17.1 and 17.2. And I'm talking Herbert first, then Love. The floor is 14.1 for Herbert and 14.2 for Love. I would give a slight lean to Herbert because he's ran a little bit more. He's also given us more high ceiling seasons as a passer. The thing that's holding him down really has just been the change in the offense, right? Is that they just are not throwing the ball as much as they used to. Now, they threw the ball a lot more, I think, than what people expected last year. Mm-hmm. First 5 games of the season, that drop back rate over expected was really bad. Well, guess what? Justin Herbert was injured during that time. After that, it was a much more, I don't want to say a super pass-friendly offense, but compared to what we've seen Harbaugh and what we've seen Greg Roman do in the past, they were leaning into having a good passer. So I do like Justin Herbert. I do like Jordan Love. And for the record, they are close, like in the median projections, with Dak. Dak comes out slightly ahead in the ceiling, but it wouldn't surprise me if Justin Herbert or Jordan Love outscored Dak Prescott. Like it's totally in the range of outcomes. I would just say that if I had to pick between these two, I would go with Justin Herbert. Jordan Love just doesn't run quite enough. And I do wonder if it's been more due to injuries, but man, the scramble rate is so low, only 3% over the last 2 years. A lot of last year you can probably write off because early in the season, remember on that wet grass or whatever it was, the surface down in Mexico, he immediately hurt his groin at the end of that game. That ended up being an issue. I don't know, if that's something that, inhibited him the rest of the season. He dealt with some other injuries, but if he scrambled around more, I would be more into Jordan Love.
Had the MCL issue in week 1. Then, that pulled groin in week 8, where I remember that Lions game, man, he could barely even jog down the field when they were in the middle of a 2-minute warning. So badly limited, and accordingly, his rushing yards per game went from 14.5, which is very solid, down to, again, just 5.5. So I would lean to Herbert. Again, we have seen this guy during a 5-year career at this point finish QB7 in fantasy points per game, a high of QB2 in the last 3 years, QB15, QB10, and QB13. We also do have a pretty solid history of rushing yards, 15 plus in every year, save for 2022 when, like Jordan Love, was playing through some really rough injuries. So I think in terms of the associated weaponry in these offenses, we can kind of call it a wash. The Packers probably have a little bit more depth, but Lab McConkey, certainly, the best of the bunch there, unless Matthew Golden really surprises us. So again, two very similar guys. But Dwayne, again, when we're talking about Justin Herbert and Jordan Love being guys that are available outside the top 12 quarterbacks, to me, that's just more reason to wait on this group of guys, because would it really shock us if they're bypassing guys like Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield going rounds earlier?
It really is just going to come down to touchdowns per attempt. These are pocket passers with a smidge of rushing ability, right? They're not down there in that Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Tua type tier. So they can give you a little bit. They could scramble in and, rush you in a touchdown. So they're slightly above those other guys, but it really will come down to, how many touchdowns they throw this season. I think that's going to be a massive part of it. As much as we like what the Chargers did last year with Justin Herbert, we don't expect them to suddenly become a pass-first offense. They just drafted Omari and Hampton. They brought over Najee Harris. They're still going to ground and pound the ball. So I think that's the one potential thing holding back Herbert from just being, I think honestly, if I was just grading quarterbacks, I think Justin Herbert in the right offense would be a player we would be talking about in the same tier as Joe Burrow. I think Joe Burrow still is ahead of him, but he would be a guy that we would have close. That would be like, oh man, this guy in a pass first offense with the right kind of weapons around him. We'd probably be ranking the guy in the top 7 or 8. Jordan Love still hasn't quite proven that he can do that. He's had the one big season, kind of a down season after that. So I think there's a little bit more variance at play with Jordan Love. But man, Herbert, the biggest thing is we know that Harbaugh is going to say just balance enough to that run game that probably is going to make some of these game script situations where we look up and we're like, 200 passing yards and 1 passing touchdown from Justin Herbert, which will be frustrating.
And that is the thing where, as much as I like looking back at last year and seeing Herbert actually did average, 1.6 more pass attempts per game than Jordan Love. Now they have Najee Harris. Now they have Amari Hampton, a beefed up offensive line. We know what Harbaugh wanted to do. I'm with it. It's very close between these guys. I will give Herbert the slight lean because I think he's the better real life player. The volume's close enough. Let's go ahead and just go with that. But yeah, pretty deep quarterback class, or at least it looks that way right now here in May. So plenty of more potential sleepers and breakouts at the quarterback position along the way, guys. First, though, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Check out the new whip.
Tight.
Fully custom.
How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy?
As many Bud Lights as it takes.
It's a lot of Bud Lights. You have to give me one of those.
Look at those binoculars, Ian. We're ready to really dive into some of these players. We've talked about some guys most everybody knows to this point, maybe even some people love, maybe some that people kind of hate, like Ian with Dak Prescott. But now we got to talk about some of these younger players, Ian. We've got several year 2 prospects, which I'll be honest, like when I was going through the projections, I was struggling with what to do with these players. It's also something that kind of hit me whenever I was in the rankings. So time for the Bud Light Breakout Watch Quarterback Edition. What are we talking about here? Michael Penix Jr., Drake May, and we have J.J. McCarthy. If you're looking at them, which one is your favorite to bust out with a top 10 finish and surprise everybody, Ian?
So we all have Drake May ranked higher because guess what, guys? Little secret from the business. We like quarterbacks that run the football. Drake May, most yards per attempt in the NFL last year. This guy actually had more yards from scrambles on the same amount as Lamar Jackson, okay? Now, that's wild. I'm sure defenses are paying much more attention to Lamar, but like that happened, okay? So we know Drake May is going to take off and run. We know he's pretty lethal when he can do it, but as I was going through this exercise, Dwayne, I'm making my notes for Drake May. I'm like, he's got to be the answer. I got to J.J. McCarthy, and don't tell Thor this because I don't want to see any more J.J. McCarthy videos on my timeline. I think he might be onto something, man. I think Thor might be right. Listen to what Kevin O'Connell has done with his quarterbacks during his time with the Vikings, okay? Kirk Cousins, who for his career was a dirt average quarterback, and that's fine. If you're a top 16 quarterback in the world, that means you're average. That's what Kirk Cousins was, okay? 2022, Kevin O'Connell gets a QB 12 season out of Kirk Cousins, all right? 2023, Cousins' season cut short. He used a QB 6 in fantasy points per game before he got injured. He gets injured. Josh Dobbs, a freaking astronaut that decides to play quarterback, rips off QB 9, QB 3, and QB 4 finishes before the wheels fall off. No more Josh Dobbs. No more Kirk Cousins. Who comes in? Nick freaking Mullins. He has 3 starts. He finishes as the QB 14, the QB 11, and QB 5. Then 2024 comes along. Oh, man, Kevin O'Connell got his quarterback. He got J.J. McCarthy. Oh, crap, he's out for the season. Who do we have now? Absolute bust. The guy who hasn't made it work on multiple teams in Sam Darnold. He works as the QB 9 in fantasy points per game. If all these players who were average to bad on any other offense were able to perform as this good, this elite, borderline fantasy quarterbacks, why can't J.J. McCarthy do it, Dwayne? Why can't he be better? Why?
Well, look, man, when we're talking about Kevin O'Connell, I think we all love KOC. Like, we all talk about the schemes that in the NFL, we know they can be like lifters to any quarterback. We know that one of them is Kyle Shanahan. We know one of them is Sean McVay. And then this is the new one with Kevin O'Connell. Heck, you could have just gone with Sam Darnold alone and what Sam Darnold had been for his career and then what he did there. Like Kirk Cousins, we have to give a little credit, was kind of doing his thing already before KOC. Yeah, he got a little bit of a bump. Nick Mullins also already was doing his thing, but that was under who? Kyle Shanahan. So there definitely are these guys that are these big pluses for their quarterbacks, and I don't think there's any debating it with KOC. I think the thing with J.J. McCarthy that I look at is like, he is an athlete, but he didn't run that much in college. And I think that's the big question for me especially when I'm talking about a list like this. Michael Penix Jr. is out for me because as far as I'm concerned right now, I have to assume he's going to be one of these pocket passers. Probably not down in the Jared Goff to a Tagovailoa tier of, I'm only going to run for 2 yards. Probably going to end up more like a CJ Stroud, someone like that, run around for 9-10 yards a game. So I have to remove him, though, because I do think that J.J. McCarthy, because he is such a good athlete, like that's the question. I've got him right now projected for 16.6 rushing yards per game. So if he hit his ceiling, that'd be more like 26. Well, then if he hit his ceiling as a passer, it'd be 255 passing yards per game. So the model really does like him from a ceiling perspective. The big question is, like, how much of that can I lean into as far as him as a rusher? With Drake May, I really feel like I know it's there. And with Drake May, I've got him projected for 33.7 rushing yards per game. If he were to hit his ceiling as a rusher, it would be more like 45 yards per game. All right. So we're really getting up there. And if you're doing that, you're probably also getting more rushing touchdowns. So I have the ceiling right now based on our new variance logic at a half touchdown per game rushing. So if he suddenly did that, man, 8 rushing touchdowns plus all those rushing yards, and then he took just even a slight step forward as a passer, because I agree with you. I think that McCarthy, like if we had to just paint a ceiling for passing yards per game, I think you have to lean to the weapons that you have for McCarthy, plus the fact that you have Kevin O'Connell. Like, that's definitely better than Josh McDaniels, okay? So I would lean to McCarthy as the passer, but I still lean to Drake May as the rusher. So it's a really close call for me. I do have Drake May ahead. I can honestly say, though, like, I totally see your argument for J.J. McCarthy, and I do think that McCarthy is one of these players that we should be thinking about later in drafts, especially if you're playing in these best ball drafts. I love J.J. McCarthy as your QB2, or if you just get boxed out. Maybe your target was a guy like Drake May and you're wanting to wait, and you're like, okay, what's the next best thing that I can get? And I don't want to go after one of these older, kind of quarterbacks that's just that their only path is through a really big passing season. McCarthy could be good enough to hit the big passing season as well as the rushing. Again, I was a little conservative with the rushing projection just because he did not run the ball that much in college. Was not a big scrambler, wasn't part of design run game, but I am acknowledging that he's a really good athlete, and it's in the range of outcomes for him to do well in that department.
And just last thought on Penix, he also obviously ran the 4.59. The 4.59 heard around the world at his pro day last year. I get it. He had 11 rushing yards and 3 starts last year. Okay, he's more of a pocket passer. Not saying that couldn't boom, but yes, we are going to prioritize JJ and Drake May. So I will give Josh McDaniels a little bit of credit. I know Tom Brady was the main engineer and the mastermind behind those Patriots offenses, but if you do go back to that 2020 season and see what McDaniels actually did with Cam Newton, a lot of fun, creative, design quarterback runs. And then even that first year with the Raiders before everything got messy with Jimmy G and those guys, that was still, I believe, a top 12 or top 13 ranked scoring offense. So not completely dismissing the thought that McDaniels could, help put May in a good position. But again, I do think, just based on the value and the fact that we can get McCarthy a round and a half later in more drafts than not, I just see so many advantages around the offense. But all that said, man, I was looking at your projections, and Kyler Murray is only projected for, I think, 1 point more per game than what Drake May is doing. And I do think when you start looking at that, we got to try to say who past Justin Fields, outside the top 12 quarterbacks, is going to start 7 teams, is going to start 17 games, and is going to be running the football a lot. That answer is Drake May.
Yeah, that answers Drake May with a maybe for J.J. McCarthy. Like, if I listened to Thor, I would have J.J. McCarthy probably projected for like 30 rushing yards per game, and then that would move him past Drake May. So maybe I should actually just override the logic for ceiling on J.J. McCarthy, and I should just make it like whatever Thor says that the ceiling should be, and that's what we would go with. And if we did that, it would be J.J. McCarthy. But I do think you're correct. Like, once you get past Justin Fields and you're thinking about these dual threat guys, it is definitely Drake May, and then I think and it could potentially also be J.J. McCarthy.
Same tier for me. We got Dak in there as well, as much as I now am a hater of my favorite team's quarterback, I guess. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, again, all these guys. And I think a lot of it in best ball is just going to come down to who we are stacking them with, what wide receivers did we get in the earlier rounds in the first place. But yeah, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, it's a really good quarterback class. Don't be shocked at both of them. Yeah, wind up being really good quarterbacks.
Excellent. All right. That was the Bud Light Breakout Watch Quarterback Edition. Okay, fantasy football fans, sure, the NFL season may be long over, but next season's action is already well underway. We're talking big trades, new signings, draft order shuffles, you name it. And all this preseason NFL action is easier to enjoy with the official beer of the NFL. So get Bud Light delivered today and enjoy every season projection, every player trade, every coaching change and draft pick with the clean, crisp taste of Bud Light, the official beer of the NFL. Stock up now for the offseason and enjoy Bud Light. Easy to drink, easy to enjoy.
All right, guys, now time for everyone's favorite game, Dynasty and number one overall pick edition. Marry, start, and cut Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young, and Mr. Cam Ward. So, Dwayne, in our redraft ranks, just for 2025, we are all in consensus. It is Trevor Lawrence, then Bryce Young, and Cam Ward. However, Dynasty, looking more into the future, I thought would make things a bit more interesting. So, Marry, start, cut, T-Law, Bryce, and Cam Ward, go.
Man, I don't want to do it on Dynasty because I want to talk about how much I love Trevor Lawrence for this year. I've been the guy that's been the absolute Trevor Lawrence hater, but if you're going to make me pick for Dynasty, I will do that first, Ian. But then I'm going to talk about for this season. And I would go ahead and go with Cam Ward because I do believe Trevor Lawrence. I mean, look, I get it. He was the golden child, the generational prospect. But I think we've seen enough at this point that I would probably go with Cam Ward. I will say it is still close, though. But I want to say for this season, man, Ian, Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I ended up moving up the ranks. Like he's sitting there as my QB 14. I'm definitely the highest among all the fantasy life rankers. And it really just came down to the fact that, man, Brian Thomas Jr. just absolutely erupted last year. And now we've got Travis Hunter added to the offense, one of the best rookie wide receivers in the rookie wide receiver supermodel over the last 7 years. So I just feel like he's got these two explosive playmakers. And I've also listened to you for multiple years talk to me about how does Trevor Lawrence throw a better ball and not get it caught, right? Like it's happened with Calvin Ridley. It's happened with so many different players. And I can't argue it. Like every time like you put together these cut-ups of Trevor Lawrence, I am literally like, how did those balls get dropped? How were those not touchdowns? And so I'm kind of leaning into that a little bit. But the other thing that I'm really leaning in here is like Trevor Lawrence is one of the guys, Ian, that could throw for 4,500 yards. Like he could hit a 4,500 yard spike season. He could throw for 35 touchdowns and he could run for 25, 30 yards per game. And he's a guy that's also done a nice job stealing touches down inside the 5-yard line over the last couple of years. And he's getting those touches that are turning into touchdowns. Now we've got Liam Cohen. So we've got a new offensive coordinator. They may change that up a little bit. But again, that's another plus. Has this guy really even had an offensive coordinator that we like over the last like 5 years of his career? So I just feel like this is the year for Trevor Lawrence. Like once I get past QB 12, I am making bets on him. And it is a boom bust bet, guys. Let me be very clear. Trevor Lawrence has done nothing ultimately as far as putting everything together and making us say, this is a guy we can really lean into. Dak, I'm leaning into. Historically, Dak's been good when healthy. And he's had hit, and whenever we look at, the bad numbers, it's like, okay, there's like this one bad number. I'm going to ignore it. There's a lot of bad numbers with Trevor Lawrence, but again, the underlying stuff is there, Ian, where he could actually spike in two areas, which would be rushing as well as what he can do as a passer. So anyway, I still haven't answered your question, but I'm cutting Bryce Ward, I'm marrying Cam Ward, and I'm starting Trevor Lawrence on the dynasty question.
Look, and I think with T-Law, we can paint the picture for why this year is going to be different, okay? I can have an easier time saying, well, the offensive line, PFF's 19th ranked group, they've subbed out 2 of those starters. They've added a legit potential, immediate top 20, top 25. That might be conservative wide receiver and Travis Hunter. If he is as good as so many people are saying, man, all of a sudden we could be saying the best wide receiver duo in the NFL resides in Jacksonville. That's how great BTJ was as a rookie. Obviously, Liam Cohen did so many good things last year. Wouldn't it be the first great offensive coordinator who we see go to a team and all of a sudden not be able to replicate that success and everything? So I'm not going to crown him, just yet. Shout out Denny Green. But, man, had the 9 rushing touchdowns in 2022, 2023. I will say, Dwayne, I looked side by side at Daniel Jones versus Trevor Lawrence's career numbers. That scared me. Like, that's my only hesitation, okay? I'm looking at the ranks right now. You have T-Law up there, QB 14. I've been in the same tier. He's my QB 17. We were higher than the other rankers. But I guess that would be the point, though. And it's honestly...
I just haven't seen a cut up from you of someone throwing darts down the field to these situations where it's like, oh my God, how was that not a touchdown for Daniel Jones? I have seen you do it multiple times with Trevor Lawrence. So I'm actually just blaming you on this. But the big thing with Lawrence, and I do agree with you, like archetype wise on the ground, it could be very similar, man. Trevor Lawrence, 19.7 rushing yards per game in 2021 as a rookie. Then it was 17 yards and then 21.2. Last year, dealing with that knee injury, it came down to 11.9, but obviously only going to be 26 years old essentially when this season starts. So I would expect that number to be more back around that 18, 19 yards per game. And that puts him in a range, man, where you could look up and like last year with Baker Mayfield, suddenly you got a 22 yard per game rushing season. Like, what if he ran for 30 yards per game this year, scored 8 rushing touchdowns, and threw for 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns? Again, like I'm saying, that would be a super pure run out, but he has the skill set to unlock that super pure run out in all those different areas. And there's honestly not that many quarterbacks that we have that could do it. So that's really why I'm in on Lawrence this year. And I'm sure that, because I have been so down on him, I feel like he's going to reward me for this, Ian. I just feel like, it's kind of like, you got blocked by Derek Carr, and then you started talking positively about Derek Carr, and he actually did some good things. I'm trying to manifest the same thing here with Trevor Lawrence.
One point, I know some of you out there are saying, well, you can do that for any quarterback. You can find these near misses. I'm telling you guys, I try to watch every single snap of every single week if I can. There have been more with T-Law over these past 2 years. Go look at some of those deep ball catchable rate numbers, guys. He has been at the top, just hasn't exactly come to fruition. And my main point here, and we kind of hinted at this yesterday, Dwayne, talking about Caleb Williams, okay? Again, alleged generational number one prospect. Have a huge upgrade in terms of scheme with a wonderkind OC now being their head coach. Big time upgrades, hopefully on the offensive line, definitely out wide receiver in the form of Travis Hunter. Caleb Williams was QB 13 in ADP last year. Now he's QB 9. Trevor Lawrence is cheaper than he was last year. He's going as a QB 19 right now. So again, just based on that cost, and I know we've seen T-Law been bad for longer than Caleb, but don't look now, man. Lawrence is only 2 years older than Caleb. The man is only 25 years young at this point. I'm with you, man. He's a late round QB. I'm going to be drafting a lot this year.
T-Law's ceiling in the model, 22.9, and we've been talking about Caleb and loving on him because of his ceiling, 23.4. They're right there together, and one is way cheaper than the other. Now, I get it. Caleb, we've only seen 1 year, so I think we do have to give him more leniency as far as, man, he could actually turn into like this superstar quarterback. And whereas we're kind of leaning against that a little bit more with Trevor Lawrence, but again, the ingredients really are there for a massive ceiling, and that puts him in the same range. It's going to be surprising to people. It puts him in the same range as Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield. You're having to take all these players ahead of Trevor Lawrence. So I'm not saying anchor every single one of your fantasy teams to Trevor Lawrence this year, but I am saying that there's a lot more upside than people are probably giving him credit for.
Speaking of quarterbacks who just weren't quite able to reach that ceiling in 2024, let's break down CJ Stroud, who, Dwayne, I'm not sure if you heard, actually finished as the QB 28 in fantasy points per game last season. Yeah, let's see how many times we can say that throughout the summer. But he was the QB 7 in 2023. So again, QB 7 1 year, QB 28 the next. Which one does he finish closer to in 2025, Dwayne?
Oh, man, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Here's the good thing with Stroud, right? I've got him projected for 13 rushing yards, so he's not in that category with Goff and Tua. So I think you could look, here's the argument for Goff and for Tua. Their median projection is better, Ian. So 17 and a half fantasy points for each one of those guys. For CJ Stroud, right now, 16 and a half. But when you start looking at the ceiling, it is slightly better for Stroud just because there is a little bit more rushing. Now, look, not enough that's going to just change your whole fantasy season. So you really probably are leaning to the quarterbacks that have been more consistent or in the offenses that that you really like. There's potential for the Texans offense to really be one that turns into something that we like this year, but not quite in the range of the way we think about, Jared Goff in Detroit. But having said all of that, Ian, he does have a little bit more rushing upside than those other guys. So I think that does help him out. He's not a guy that I'm going out of my way to target those still. It's like I just can't quite get my arms around it. I love Nico Collins. I actually think that Christian Kirk right now might be one of the best values on the board in best ball. He's getting completely ignored, Ian. He's goes in the 50s.
This year's Darnell Mooney. That's who he is.
Yes, exactly. And look, we've got Jaden Higgins. Look, we like him. We've got Jalen Noel. Those guys are great. But man, Christian Kirk, like, this is a veteran wide receiver that's probably going to start in the slot for him immediately and might even be their starting wide receiver on the outside in 2 wide receiver sets immediately. So we like that. They did add 2 young guys to the mix with Tank Dell most likely out for this season. So they've got some options there. But again, outside of Nico, it's like we can't say for sure if we can depend on any of those things. We think Christian Kirk will be solid, but is he going to change the complexion of the entire passing game for the Texans? Probably not. Like, probably going to pick up some key third downs and do some nice things for him. So I think that's the real kicker for me, because I do believe for Stroud, even though he gives you a little bit more in the rushing department, like, I think most of his ceiling is still really tied to what he can do in the passing game. And I have just enough questions that I'm kind of putting him in between where we saw him last year and where we saw him in that rookie season. But here's the thing, he has at least demonstrated that ceiling, and that is valuable. So there's a lot of pocket passers we can talk about, Ian, that have never demonstrated a ceiling, we saw from CJ Stroud and what he did in his rookie season.
We both have him ranked QB 20. And again, the reason why I just can't get the JJ McCarthy bump or just, hey, rank him ahead of Drake May, he's been better. The reason I can't do that is just, why is this year going to be different? All right. CJ Stroud's, doing a little bit less media this time around. Couldn't turn on, couldn't go to Twitter last year without seeing him in something. Funny how that works. But everyone just says there's the O-line sucked and Bobby Slowick. Bobby Slowick was apparently one of the hottest OCs in the league in 2023. I don't know what happened in 2024. We're blaming all that on Bobby. Apparently nothing on CJ Stroud. Funny how that works. But new OC, Nick Caley. He was an offensive assistant and tight end fullback coach for the Patriots from 2015 to 2022. And then he goes to the Rams, coaches tight ends, and then he's the pass game coordinator in 2024, a.k.a. he watched Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford do their thing. So, again, is he better than Bobby? I don't really know. We don't know. We haven't seen him lead an offense before. Yes, they shuffled. The offensive line was bad. I'm not disagreeing with that. They shuffled him. Look, Dwayne, I'm not an expert on offensive linemen, okay? Maybe some people out there, they just watch every single game, every snap, only looking at the offensive line. Kudos to you guys, okay? You are ball knowers. PFF tries to do that, and they tell me that every single offensive lineman the Texans added were bad last year, okay? Every single one below average. So I just struggle because, yes, the wide receivers end up, but we don't know all right, we're okay with Christian Kirk. I like it. The volume's going to be there. Nico's a stud wide receiver one. He's top 5, top 6 in our ranks for a reason. But Nico, Christian Kirk, and a pair of Iowa State rookies with a dirt average tight end, Dalton Schultz, and aging Joe Mixon, that's not like a top 5 group of playmakers.
Man, you've waited so long to disparage the name of Dalton Schultz. I'm really proud of you and the restraint that you've shown, but you did finally get there. So congratulations on that. Look, here's the easiest way, in my opinion, that you look at CJ Stroud. Like, you look at the quarterbacks that are going around him and you look, did these other quarterbacks, or have they also demonstrated a ceiling to what CJ Stroud has at least shown? Justin Herbert, yeah, he has, actually multiple times. So I'm taking Justin Herbert over CJ Stroud. Jordan Love. Some people are going to think the answer to this is no, but if we look at the season before last, Jordan Love actually showed a similar season to CJ Stroud. Yes, Stroud's was a little bit better, but Jordan Love was right there along with him. So I think that one is one where you can kind of, okay, fine, you can kind of make your choice between the two of them. But then I think when you start looking at the guys where you're like, okay, some of these are some of the older pure pocket passers, things like that. I think that's where you start considering, okay, I'm just going to take CJ Stroud. I'm going to take the younger player. I know he had that ceiling year in his rookie season, and maybe he can get back to that form. But I would just be against anyone just assuming that's going to happen. And obviously no one is. There's a reason that he's sitting in the ranks where we have him. There's also a reason he's not going super high as far as where he is right now from an ADP standpoint over on Underdog.
Dwayne, let's break down the idea now. If we're in a draft, okay, and all right, we're waiting. We got CJ Stroud, we got Tua there. Like, okay, we waited on quarterback. Hopefully we can get one of these guys. Quarterback run happens. This has happened to us live on stream. Hopefully we'll get some more of those going this year for you guys to check out. What is your plan if, say, the top 22, top 23 quarterbacks are off the board, where we're so deep in the draft at this point? Maybe you can take two. We're probably going to have to settle for a Matthew Stafford, a Sam Darnold, a Geno Smith of the world. But how can you still find upside in the late ranges of drafts if, again, you just, get on the wrong side of a quarterback run?
Yeah, so a couple of things here. You know, we've talked about there's not a Jaden Daniels that we feel so great about this year in that round 9 to 11 range. Okay, so that changes the dynamics. One way you can handle that, and we talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show, you guys can go back and check it out. You just take one of the elite dual threat quarterbacks. Josh Allen's your flavor. We don't care. Take him. Lamar Jackson's your guy. Go for it. Jalen Hurts, the most underpriced quarterback. It's criminal right now. We'll see what happens with the tush-push rule. And then we have Jaden Daniels. You could just take one of those guys, call it a day, or maybe you even squeeze Joe Burrow into that tier. So there is a legit reason to take a quarterback earlier this year. But if you don't want to do that, and then let's say you miss your backup plan, it's Justin Fields because something else falls in your lap. Maybe, your backup plan after that, is Caleb Williams, and you miss out on that one as well. And then you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I'm going to end up having to take this pocket passer. I didn't get Drake May, but I'm not super happy about it. Maybe it's a Justin Herbert. Maybe it's a Jared Goff. And you don't think there's this really high ceiling, and you want the opportunity to tack on some ceiling at your quarterback position. I do believe, Ian, this could be a year, and it does depend on how your rosters are set up in your league and how many bench spots and all those things you have, where if this happened, you could consider, you and I usually tell people you don't draft 2 quarterbacks in redraft, right? Unless you're playing in a super deep league. In most leagues, like what you guys are playing in, I wouldn't draft 2 quarterbacks, but this could be a year where you would do it. And I do believe your 2 targets are Anthony Richardson and Jaxson Dart. Now, Anthony Richardson is the one I would prioritize because I do believe the Colts most likely are going to want to start him at the beginning of the year and give it another run. Jaxson Dart, more likely, unless he goes crazy in camp and we hear about it, we're going to have to wait until the Russell Wilson thing kind of plays out. They get to a spot in the season where it's like, okay, now we're going to go to Jaxson Dart. But the bottom line is you guys have heard us talking a lot about ceilings and floors this offseason and the way that variance works. If you look at Anthony Richardson, Ian, and I only projected him for 198 passing yards per game, which would put his floor around 175, his ceiling only at 220. So we're not getting really crazy here, guys. That would give him a ceiling of 23.7 fantasy points per game. That ranks 9th best out of all the players we have. So you might not know how long you're going to have Anthony Richardson for, but he is a way to get ceiling into your lineup in the games that he's playing. Jaxson Dart is really similar, not that far behind. 23.1 points per game is his ceiling. I've got him projected for 222 passing yards per game, so slightly better than what we have for Anthony Richardson. And then you got 31 rushing yards per game. We're talking about a guy that averaged over 40 in college between his design rushing attempts and his scrambles. So those are the 2 guys that give us that dual threat potential. And after all those other players are gone. And again, you compare him with someone else you plan on starting on week 1, and maybe that's Matthew Stafford. Maybe you're having to go with Matthew Stafford in week 1. But then once one of these other guys gets in the lineup, or maybe Anthony Richardson is there week 1, you now have this hidden way to get that upside into your lineup, especially later in the season when you're trying to win your fantasy championship. The other option, Ian, everybody knows their leagues. Like, maybe you don't have to draft a guy like Jaxson Dart, but he's just going to be the guy you're monitoring the waiver wire on. You're just sitting there watching for the news. It's getting closer and closer that it could be time for Jaxson Dart to start. And that's something you and I will be talking about throughout the season. We'll probably be like 2 weeks ahead. Okay, guys, like if you need an upside at quarterback, now's the time. The Giants are not playing well. They're going to have to go to Jaxson Dart soon, and we know he's going to give us this upside. So I think it's a unique scenario with quarterback this year, and I do think these 2 players are really interesting ways to go about it. If you talk best ball, it is a little different because you're not getting guaranteed starts with these guys. These guys are probably best in 3 quarterback builds, not 2 quarterback builds in best ball, but still similar kind of concept, right? It's a path to upside when they are in the lineup.
I think I would prefer Anthony Richardson just because when you look at it, man, he's had 12 full games over these past 2 years. Please, injury gods, one time, just give this man a break. He can probably take a little better care of himself when he's out there too. I get it. But 17.3 fantasy points per game, that's good for QB 13 status. Like, we have seen him go out there in the NFL and be actively one of the most productive rushers. His numbers per game are up there with Jalen Hurts as the most effective rushers in the leagues. I know. Passing has a long way it needs to go, but at least the deep balls look good from time to time. I mean, believe me, guys, I've seen it. The easy checkdowns are anything but for Anthony Richardson. But for a guy who, again, just hasn't played much football over the past last few years. Hopefully signing Daniel Jones has, caused him to take the game more seriously in his preparation and all that. I still do think there's at least a really good fantasy quarterback in there, albeit, again, it's not been looking good through 2 years. With Dart, it's just one of those things where I have a tougher time. One, he needs to win that starting job, which I don't think is going to be given to him the same way it could for Richardson. Now, you look at the Giants' schedule, miserable. It literally could be him by week 5, Dwayne. We're starting with the Commanders, Cowboys, Chiefs, Chargers. We get to the Saints in week 5. That's the first game that you can maybe wrap your mind around the Giants winning. Gets even worse after that. Eagles, Broncos, 49ers, Bears, Packers, Lions. Oh my God, those poor players. And I guess the other thing would just be the Giants supporting cast has been horrible. We love Malik Neighbors, okay? But just, again, I use my supporting cast rating. I take all the PFF grades except for passing. Giants objectively over the last 5 years are dead last in that. And then you look at the upgrades, it's the same wide receivers around Neighbors. We're still trotting out Theo Johnson at tight end. I like Cam Scatterbo, but come on, that's a day 3 running back joining more day 3 running backs and Tyron Tracy and Devin Singletary. I just struggle to think that Jaxson Dart coming under center, he would be the youngest quarterback in the NFL if he does get the start. I'm less convinced that his rushing is actually going to translate to the NFL, and we have seen it for Richardson so far.
Yeah, but I think we would have said the same thing about Bo Nix last year. There's a lot of the same things. It doesn't really have a weapon. We got Cortland Sutton. He was a rusher in college, but more just in Auburn, not later in his career with Oregon. All I'm looking for is the archetype of player, a guy that can hit either in rushing or they can hit in passing, or you get really lucky and they hit in both. So Jaxson Dart just checks those boxes. And I do think that Malik Neighbors, because he is such an elite player, you can build an offense whenever you've got an absolute alpha like that, and then you just get things out of other players around them. I know I'm going to talk about a guy named Aaron Rodgers, who's he's an amazing player, and you can't even compare a player like Jaxson Dart to Aaron Rodgers. But the example being, there were many years where really all the Packers had was Devontae Adams. And the other guys were just sprinkles. So Darius Slayton would be a sprinkle on the chocolate-covered donut. The chocolate-covered donut was Devontae Adams. And in this case, Malik Neighbors can be that kind of player. So I can't disagree with you about the surrounding cast, some of the schedule things, those sort of issues. But at the end of the day, it's just really hard to find players that could give you this potential rushing upside that you could get with Jaxson Dart. I also do agree with you that I don't know that it's going to translate and I didn't give him what he was getting in college, right? Obviously, I took it down from what he was getting there to the 31 rushing yards per game. But man, if he did hit his ceiling, you're talking about 43 rushing yards per game. So it's just those ingredients, and that's really it. Jaxson Dart has them. There's not really many other names after that do.
I think that Bo Nix, Caleb tier of rushers, which is really good, is exactly where Jaxson Dart could be. And hey, that's a nice floor to have potentially as a rusher. But again, Richardson's the one more so that actually can't get into that Jalen Hurts, dare I say even Lamar Jackson category, thanks to those extra touchdowns around the goal line. So also Jalen Milroe fits this archetype, but again, given the investment in Sam Darnold and also the presence of my guy Drew Lock as the backup, Milroe to me feels like the most like the guy to just get a year off, again, kind of develop as a passer. But again, we will be watching on the waiver wire because he would be a guy that really would be much closer to Hurts and Lamar level rushers than, again, what we're seeing with Dart. So last question, though, Dwayne, we did have a handful of quarterbacks change teams this offseason. A lot of them are old. They're not exciting. We're not ranking them inside our top 25, but between Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, and Joe Flacco, what quarterback would you be most willing to throw a late round dart at?
Man, these are all really similar players, but I would lean to Geno Smith. I just, nice. Aaron Rodgers just really has taken a step back. I just like the overall moves for the Raiders. I still don't know that they have a player that can unlock things deep and do all that. Like Jack Besh is going to kind of do some of the same things as Brock Bowers, who's doing some of the same things as Jacoby Myers. So there's this duplicity in the offense. But when I watch Geno Smith play quarterback, I like it. That's just what I'm going to say. The dude's out there throwing absolute dimes. He's shown us that he can deal with pressure. Sam Darnold, on the other hand, when things are kept clean, playing with a great coordinator, looked really good last year. But he might be in a situation that looks a lot more like what he was with whenever he was with the Jets when he was young. And he's under pressure all the time. So that worries me with Sam Darnold. And again, we've got, duplicity. JSN, Cooper Kupp. Really? What's MVS going to be doing? He's just going to be out there running wind sprints, so I worry about that. But I would say Geno Smith would be the guy for me if I was throwing a dart on one of these players.
I'm with you as well. So again, cannot stress enough, please, for the love of God, do not start your fantasy team with one of these quarterbacks, but you do need a late backup or more likely in best ball, just trying to get that QB3 on the squad. I do think Geno would be the best pick there. So guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. Make sure you check us out the rest of the week though. We got Kendall Valenzuela, aka K-Dog, Cooter Doodle and the gang coming at you. Dwayne and I'll be back next week for some running back talk. Again, going through the same format. So we appreciate you and yeah, just have a great day. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.